First of all, give me your reaction. I would think that nothing really was settled here today.
Well, this certainly I'm not going to convince Representative Kooyenga, and he's not going to convince me of a different point of view. We're both, I think, fairly educated in our own opinions, and this is an audience that I think has a lot of folks who are already very interested in this issue as well. But I think it's always good to get the issues out there. It's good for people to get a chance to actually dig in on some of this stuff instead of just hearing rhetoric, and that was certainly one of the things we got today, was instead of just, I want to help Milwaukee Public Schools, we got to put a little meat on that bones and say, what exactly are these plans looking to do?
Are you concerned at all if the board does not take this deal that's on the table for the next month, that Representative Kooyenga and others will come back with something probably in your minds more draconian?
So it is not my place to guess what the Milwaukee Public School Board is going to do. I don't know what their deliberations are on this. This is a matter for them to decide. But I will say, you heard the numbers I said today. Within 3 years, $41 million, over $41 million would be leaving the Milwaukee Public Schools. This is not a kinder, gentler plan. This means death, or a different way means death. Either, to say, could something worse come down the pike? I'm sure it could, but as it stands, this plan takes over such a significant amount of the Milwaukee Public Schools that I cannot imagine how the system could survive it.
I want to make sure I understand your math right. That's adding up the $2,000 difference between the charter versus the public per pupil funding.
So the per pupil funding, that $8,188, that's the amount of money that would go to MPS, but goes and follows the child to the vendor. Exactly. So there are, in big school systems, just as in any organization, there's an economy of scale. So to assume that if one child leaves, all of that funding they take with them is just about that one child is not true. That funding all amasses into part of what the budget is of a large organization like Milwaukee Public Schools. You take $41 million out of that organization in 3 years, and we're going to see repercussions that this city has never seen. It would be reminiscent of when we saw the major plant closings in manufacturing along the 30th Street corridor. When you see that kind of layoffs happening and the repercussions in our communities, Milwaukee Public Schools is the largest employer in our city at this point. And you do that kind of damage to that employer, and I'm not just selfishly talking about the members of the Milwaukee Teachers Education Association, I'm talking about all of the folks who depend on the Milwaukee Public Schools to educate our children and who depend on it as for their employment.
MPS has 6, I think, instrumentality charters already.
Sounds correct.
With sort of uneven results. Some are below, some are above.
Do you mean instrumentality or non-instrumentality?
Non-instrumentality, absolutely, you're right. With this being another one, would the results be any different for students, not for the funding?
This would not be a non-instrumentality. The key thing about a non-instrumentality charter school is that it reports to the Milwaukee Public Schools, publicly elected school. This school would report to the commission, so that's different. It's not the same thing.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, that's why the issue of governance, I kept going back to that, because really everything they talk about in this plan can be done under the governance of our publicly elected school board, in which case the citizens have a voice of who those folks are. The citizens can bring their grievance to the group of folks, but this puts it all behind closed doors.
You
have my son's job. My son's a filmmaker, and he's in the
Guess what? You're still. Guess what?
Have you actually been to 5306? I spoke with someone at this meeting who said that she invited you and Senator Darling to come down and knock on doors and talk to people, and that and she received that response.
It's on the reception office.
Okay.
All right.
One more question. Dr. Means, actually himself, and others at this meeting, kind of across all sectors, both community members, teachers, and you have people who were there as part of the advisory council. In Dr. Means' proposal, actually, he says and has gone on the record saying more funding is necessary in order to raise student achievement in Milwaukee and across Wisconsin. Clearly, you know that he's implementing the plan in a way that is not literal to what was written in the legislation. Being that he is saying that more resources, more funding is necessary, and that he said at this meeting that Milwaukee needs not the same amount of resources as other places around the state, but Milwaukee actually needs more because of those poverty issues, because we're educating kids. Will you be advocating for more resources in the next budget? Is that something that...
Absolutely. I've been on the budget writing committee for 2 sessions now, and every single time a budget has got on my lap, 2 things have happened. A, we put more money towards schools, and 2, we gave the middle-class Wisconsin
Actually, funding over the last 6 years has decreased related to inflation.
So, as I said in the debate, what happened is that at Act 10, so after taking office 40 days of the Democrats, we got a letter from the Fiscal Bureau saying the state needs to do something, you don't have enough money. That was a cut to education, K-12 with the tools.
Instead of something else?
Can I continue? There was a lot of cuts across
You're talking
everything at
about
that time.
balancing the budget, so why education as opposed to something
else? At that
else?
time, in February 2011, there was a cut to K-12 education. Since then, there has not been a cut to K-12 education. You have my commitment that going forward, that every single time I was down the budget writing, can I finish my... Be professional. I'll be professional. Is every single time that a budget has been on my lap, then what has happened is we have found more money for schools, and that budget has left the Joint Finance Committee with more money for schools. So.
In your opinion, what's wrong with the Abley Means proposal?
Yeah, I think that Chris Abley and Dr. Means are giving a lot of power to Milwaukee Public Schools to dictate what happens in those schools. The legislation gives them a lot more options to just take the ball and run with it. What they're doing, and I understand it, is they're trying to diminish the amount of educational friction and animosity that's surrounding the idea. And so I understand that. I still support them, what they're doing. It'll be interesting to see what the Milwaukee Public School Board does.
Is it going to work? I mean, if the board goes along with this, you're saying it should go further with the
I think it's more likely to work if they go their own route and not work with the board.
If the board does not go along with this, and this question was asked, but you and Senator Darling, what does that going back to the drawing board look like?
Well, I mean, we have the federal law now. That federal law has passed, and no one's talking about this. It's out there. Federal law says we need to come out with a plan in Wisconsin for the 5% of worst performing schools. The vast majority of those schools are actually in Milwaukee. So I think our plan is actually a template to comply with federal law, and what we could do is we could appoint a different governing structure, or we could increase the number of schools every year.
Does that go all the way up to something that like Michigan has done with Detroit Public Schools, an emergency manager?
Every single state's different in their approach, and what we're going to do is what we have done, and that is look around the country and see what makes sense, what works, what doesn't work. We're going to get community input like we have, and we'll come up with something that makes sense.
What if your providers really want to come in?
That's a really good question. Yeah, because what you're seeing is some of the best charter schools in the nation are reluctant to come here to Milwaukee. And so that was one of my intents today, is to have this conversation. I wish Kim was here, actually he was sick, is to have this conversation and say, let's both turn down the volume. I don't think I was doing this, but I know the teachers union has. Let's turn down the volume on this friction in education, the signs, the clenched fist. I mean, in education, why do we need a clenched fist? We're teaching children.
Representative Kooyenga, at this meeting, the people there, including Dr. Means, agreed that the friction was in fact coming from the legislation itself. Is that something that you deny?
I disagree with that.
Your commissioner is on record saying that.
He's not my commissioner.
Representative, who do you consider the best providers around the country?
As far as charter schools, I didn't get back to the specific names. I know some out of Chicago that have done pretty well. New Orleans, for example. New York City has a lot of them.
But you said they're reluctant to come here, so I assume you have specific company names that you're
Yeah, I know if they're
about?
comfortable. I mean, because the final decision hasn't been made on that yet, so I'm not comfortable throwing their names out there at the time.
But you are confident that if MPS says no, we will see providers come.
No, I'm not making any promises, but I think it's more likely that you have high-performing providers that are interested in Milwaukee if we raise the funding amount from the state, and if we have an environment in Wisconsin that is less toxic on the education front.
Are you anticipating next legislative session trying to raise the funding for charter schools?
Yes.
Okay.
To what?
Got to see what the budget is. I mean, right now there's tremendous pressure on the budget on Medicaid spending. That's where it essentially keeps growing. And obviously, as a policymaker, there's always, different priorities and sort those things out and have to work with our caucuses. So I know, like the rural legislators wanted a lot of additional money to broadband and some of the issues they're dealing with as well. So as a caucus, we go into the budget with these priorities and we battle it out and see what we come up with. But what I would like to see is more money for charter schools, voucher schools, and public schools.
And public schools?
Absolutely.
you say?
Yep. All right, thanks guys. Have a good night.
Thank you.
Yep.